Start recording. So you can grab the link up on the network if you want to screen share what's on my screen. You'll be able to see what's on yours. Now I'm recording this as well. Sort of turn this so we can aim it at this way. Um, and so I started off again, nuns having fun. I wanted my nun to dance, and so I just did a bunch of these thumbnails. These took like less than a minute each. From looking at reference, I recognized these like repeating patterns, and the one that I was really liking, it's like there's a lot of these bell patterns or these triangle patterns that happen with their clothes. It's a lot of these like shawl or dress shapes that ended up having like sort of ending up being these like triangles. So this like three triangle idea was kind of where I started. I kind of thought about doing like sort of a shorter, rounder nun, but the more I did this, the more I kind of liked the long, like stretched out form. So this was one of the first few I did. After that, I took it onto another layer, kind of warped it a little bit to get a little bit of a nicer line of action instead of that very vertical, boring line of action. So this is kind of where I settled on my thumbnail. So from that thumbnail, I did a cleaner ink or line drawing of it. I went with a light or a mid-tone gray because I knew all of the colors were going to be black. Right? So once I get that black in there, that mid-tone gray allows me to pop some of those shapes out. And so this is kind of the character I'm going for. So I wanted to give her just a little bit of like, what would she look like on a brighter background just as a test. So what I'm going to be working off of today, like this was not in Toon Boom. Again, I was setting out a garage when I did this. I just sketched this out. So if you sketched yours out in Photoshop, that's fine. I'm going to bring this into Toon Boom, and I'm going to do a vector version of this, and I'm going to break it up in ways that allow me to do some very limited animation with her today without having to like do a ton of redrawing. So basically how I'm going to break her up, I think, is I'm going to do her entire torso and dress as one layer. I'm going to do her front arm as a layer and her rear arm probably as a layer as well. I'm not for sure I'm going to do that. There's a chance I may just do the hands. That way we just get a little bit of a bobble in the hands as a separate layer. And I'm going to do her head as a layer as well. But I realized that if her entire head rotated, then the habit that's hooked to that will rotate as well. So I may tinker around with that a little bit and just do some tests to see like what is the minimum I want to happen. Do I want her head sort of bobbling inside of the habit? Or do I want the whole thing rotating? Or do I want the bottom of the habit to sort of stay in one place while the top of her head kind of bobbles a little bit? So just sort of a little head bob to the music, right? I may also break one of the feet out into its own layer so I can do like a little foot tap at the same time. Yes?
So we can import Photoshop files.
Mm-hmm. You should be able to. In fact, you can do all of your animation in another program if you want to. Like I know people who do large portions of their character design in Illustrator and bring in the Illustrator files to different layers in Toon Boom, and then they animate on that. But yeah, you should be able to import any images into there. So I've kind of shown you what I've been working on. I'm curious to see what you've worked on. I know you may be at a different point. You may just have a few thumbnails. You may have a full sketch. But let's just take a minute, hop up, and walk around. If you would like to show your connected ball animation as well, you can sort of open that up on the other screen. I did a version of that one as well. I didn't export anything out, I don't think. But I'll kind of show you my example that I kind of finished up yesterday as the class was wrapping up. If it will open. Maybe. There it goes. So just sort of my example was, my original ball was the head, and so then it can kind of lead the rest of it around. So, right? I if I had a little bit more time, I'd probably extend it by a few frames to give that little dangle at the end some time to settle. So you get the idea of kind of what we're aiming at for this. Now I know all of this is trapped in a Toon Boom file. I'm going to show you a little bit later today how to export this out into an image sequence and how to export this out into a movie. Let's just take a few minutes, walk around, and see what everybody's got. I'm just curious. To the demon kind. I enjoy projects. I love it. Love it. You're going to work this on. See, that's why I wanted to walk around. Like, I enjoy these so much. So this is cool. Hopefully you're having fun with this. You get an idea of like the variety. We have everything from sort of some aliens and monsters to secret spy to like, so it's just going to be a fun little piece, I think. Also, you're noticing that everybody's just kind of in a different style, and I think that that's cool too. So what I'm hoping we can do is once we do these animations, you'll have 3 animations with this character that's going to be about 1 second to 2 seconds each, right? But that can loop a few times, right? Because it's a dance, and the dance is kind of repetitive, right? And then we can just export all of these out, mix them together into one giant file, and have like a little music video of our character dancing, right? Or our characters dancing. My thought is the beginning of it, maybe they're not into the dance as much, they're just sort of bobbing their head, and then the music takes control, and by the end of it, they're just all flailing around everywhere, right? To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, there's a new file up on the network under the IGM classes, and then Greg 2D Anim resources, right? So it's this dance folder. So before you go clicking on that dance folder, don't open these files from the network, okay? Copy this entire dance folder to your computer because this is the resources you're going to need to work on this. Once I've given you this file, you should be able to open the file that's in there and just start doing your animation in that folder, and everybody's will match up, we'll all have the same timing and all of that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and copy a version of it. Actually, you copy a version of it down. I'm going to pull mine from another place that I have on the network where I'm going to be working from. So it's pretty much the same folder or file, it's just in a different spot. So it's Dance X Stage. So I have a couple of reference layers in here, and these layers are just to to kind of help you out in what you're going to do. So you'll notice that earlier in one of those other folder, I'm sorry, for you it will be up in this audio folder. For me, it's in a different folder. I have this full song in here. It's called Full Version. It's about 2 minutes long, I think. I'll let you kind of hear it, a little bit of it. So. So very Saturday Night Live, like dance guys, right? Like just something you would hear kind of in a in a club that can't afford to license the good songs, right? I intentionally tried to find something sort of in the middle. Again, if you don't like that song, that's all right. There's a lot of stuff that is 120 beats per minute. You can always edit this together later. Eventually, you'll probably be putting together a demo reel, and so that's something to consider, is that if you pick a song for your demo reel that is roughly that same tempo, it just looks good to the music, right? Like your reel kind of has a good beat to it. So what I've done is I've taken a shorter clip of that. It's this. So that's the little clip that I've thrown into this Tune Boom file for you. And I've broken it up into sort of the beats, right? I don't know if anybody, does anybody here play a musical instrument? Maybe learn to play in high school or something like that. So I had my music teacher taught us, for counting music, your whole notes were like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when you start breaking it up into quarter notes, it's 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4. There's all of these different things. All I've done here is given you the 1, 2, 3, 4s. I think they're on the quarter notes, not the whole notes, but you can kind of see the. So to be able to hear the music in your on your computer, you're gonna have to click sound and this one right here, which will play the sound when you're scrubbing. So. Let's turn that down a little bit. That's just blaring. So you'll see. So that 1, 2, 3, 4, those are all points where you could hit interesting key poses, right? So I'll just kind of show you in this reference folder here, if you click this little plus sign, I have 3 layers. I have the beat layer, and that's these numbers we're seeing. But if we turn that off and I click on dance A, you'll see very simple. That's just hitting on 1, 2, 3, 4. Like your keys are just hitting on those notes, right? So that's sort of going to be our low key. Like you can pick what your character's doing. Maybe they're just sort of snapping their fingers. Maybe I think my thinking with my nun is that she's going to be bobbing her hands and sort of bobbing her hands just a little bit too, right? And then as the song continues to play, like as we watch all of these characters bobbing their head, they're going to get into it a little bit more and start dancing a little bigger, right? This is the animation. This is not my nun's dance. I'll do something different with her. And I think that's actually going to be the fun part. You don't have to know what they're going to do yet, right? Like once you start drawing, you'll come up with some ideas. These little thumbnails I've just done here, they literally took like a minute per animation, not like a minute per. So you can come up with hundreds of ideas until you find the one you like. This second animation we're doing tomorrow, we're going to do frame by frame, the same way we did the ball with the ball leading the other ball, right? So we'll animate all of the frames kind of in a simplified version, and then you can draw your full illustration on top of that simplified skeleton, right? The third animation, at that point, you've already done two, you've figured some stuff out, you're kind of getting to know Toon Boom a little bit. And that's on Friday. Friday will mostly be a work day, and you can just go nuts on whatever you want to do, like spinning around on their head. I know that there will inevitably be a twerking in the room. I'm confident somebody will make an inappropriate character twerk. So whatever, I don't care. It's your animation. Do what you want to do. But this is where you just get to have fun. Like, just go big, right? Each of these animations that I've shown you here, though, are 1 second long. All I've got, and of course, this is just the key poses. This doesn't have the in-betweens in there, right? But basically, I have my start frame. My start frame, and then for me, I kind of had a mirror of the same thing, right? And then I had a transition to there, and then sort of a mirror of that transition. So we get this loop, right? We start here to here, here, back to here, and then when we go to here, that's just the first frame again, right? And you'll see that where it loops is on frame 25. So frame 1 through 24, 24 frames per second, 1 second of animation. So that's 24 drawings for each of these. Like that first day we did 20 thumbnails. So I don't feel like this is too much. And so that's the plan. Like between now and the end of the week, we're gonna make these 3 animations. Monday, you'll have the weekend to sort of finish up any loose ends. And then Monday, you bring them in, we're gonna watch all of them. I'll take those files, I'm going to mix them together into one long video, and then we'll put that out there, and I'll put some credits to it. So you will have contributed to a full little short animation. I don't know, maybe we'll do something with it. Speaking of which, there is actually an animation festival in Johnson City every year, and it will be during this class. So do it. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's the Blue Plum Animation Festival. It's not during Blue Plum anymore because Blue Plum decided to move away from downtown. So it's going to be during the Little Chicago Festival. And I think they're also changing the name of the festival. But we have a couple of students who will have animations in that. So I just think that there's some cool stuff and some opportunities. So if you're all okay with it and it turns out okay, maybe I'll just submit that for you next semester and you'll have a animation and a festival this time next year. If you're cool with it. If you're like, I don't want mine in there or whatever, let me know. I can pull that out. So, what do you think? Sound like a plan? Yeah. Everybody all right with this? All right. Well, let's animate some stuff. I know that before we jump into animating my nun, I recognize that some of you are still working on character design, and I know you're probably getting tired of hearing me talk about character design. I'm not going to make you do any more sketches in class or anything. I wanted to look at some examples of how some professional character designers, because I am not one, how they approached a similar assignment. Right? So there's a couple of books that were on my book list I mentioned at the beginning of the semester. And I have some pages from those that I use for illustration purposes. I just sort of scanned in. 21, let's actually start with a different one. So again, this has a little bit of cartoon nudity. I'll show you sort of on the small scale. They basically gave people the same reference image, a nude male, a nude female, and said, draw the, I don't remember how they phrased it. I think it was the average or the typical male and the typical female, draw that in your illustration style, right? So I thought that I love this book. It was actually a Kickstarter book, I think, and so I have a copy of it downstairs if you're interested. I'll not click on the first two just because YouTube may kick it off, but we'll go through some of the cartoony examples here of the male and female, and you can see up in the top corner it has the name of the illustrator. So this is just a guy and a girl, like, go. Like that, like that was the assignment. And just look at the variety we get out of this. So there's the male, the female. Felix Sputnik. Actually, this guy has an animation, a walk cycle animation breakdown that he does that's actually really incredible. Um, like, like pushing it big, right? So there's not a right or a wrong way to draw. I mean, I'm sure somewhere a drawing teacher just cringed at them. But like you're going to look at the person sitting next to you, and you're going to see elements of their illustration that you're like, ooh, I like that. I wish I could do that. Sure, implement it in there, but everybody kind of has their own style, right? And you're going to continue to push that style and push your own style, right? Some of the interesting things I want you to notice, though, is the way that these people use shape, right? So, like repetition of shape. Like this one is a very round character, right? Particularly the female. There's like a lot of these round circular shapes, right? And then there's sort of to contrast those round circular shapes, there's a lot of these like kind of straight, thin stretches, right? So she has this thin torso, she has this thin head, like the like legs are short, right? So I think there's just a really neat like combination of patterns in here, right? So again, like you can just see like the different things that each illustrator brings. Some of this is just sort of line quality, like line style. Interestingly, a lot of these people are animators. Like even though they're doing this character design book, a lot of them are you can find animation by them. And this I think this book is still for sale through Kickstarter, but it's like $40, $50 or something like that. But it's one of it's just literally hundreds of pages of this. And you're starting to see like sort of varying degrees of abstraction versus like realism. So we can click through these pretty very abstract. Like I think this is like contrasting, like probably not the most realistic one in the book, but a little closer to realism. Way far away from like realism, right? I actually love that. It's awesome. I actually got a lot of these in YouTube. So this was just the assignment, draw a male and a female. I do think it's interesting to point out that they said draw the average or draw the typical male and female, and the reference that they gave them were white people. Like, and I think that is something that like you have to think about as well. Like, how do you want to represent your characters? And like diversity is always a plus. Like you're always going to add more style, more interest, more just everything to it by not going for your gut reaction. If you're, if you happen to be Caucasian and your first thought is like, oh, this character I'm going to draw is white, like just think like, do they have to be? Like, can I choose some other options here that make this more accurate to the way the world really is? So not going to get on any soapboxes on any of that, but that's something to think about. There are several books that have taken this challenge to a couple of other levels. And 21 Draw is one of them. I think that, I can't remember who did the other one. There's another one, I don't have a copy of it up here with me, where their challenge was to pick a character or to pick a story that everybody knows and assign all of the characters from that story to one artist. And so they picked Robin Hood. So you had to design Robin Hood, Maid Marian, Little John, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Prince John. I think there's 8 characters in total, but you design them in your style. I don't have examples of that, but that's a great book because those are already archetype characters. However, 21 Draw did another book, which was they just gave the concept artist a word, right? And they said, go. So, croc. And I think the assignment was with this is that there had to be, I think, a front and a side, 3 headshots, 3 poses, and some hands, right? Or hands and feet, maybe. And so you get to see like different people's takes on this. Studying this sort of stuff is awesome. Actually, if this is something you're interested in for class use, don't like go posting them all over the internet or whatever. I can put these up on the network so you can look at them in more detail. Again, if you're interested in it, I have the whole book downstairs. So this was Diva, Duck. So this one kind of, to me, felt a little a typical solution for that. Yeah, very, very daffy to this one. Evil Clown. I will move on from this one quickly in case this is really disturbing anybody. Ghost. Right, so I think this is interesting. You just say the word ghost, and every person in this room, a different thought came into their head, right? Nobody has the same life experiences and whatever. Maybe you immediately thought of Casper. Maybe some of you thought of Patrick Swayze. Maybe some of you thought of like your grandma who told you a story about a house that she used to live in that she thought was haunted, right? Like everybody's mind went to something different, right? Let's try that unplugging quickly. Try closing down the window and reopening it and see if that works. So again, everybody's going to bring something different to this thought when you hear that word ghost. And I like that this guy went like Victorian, like gentleman. So I also put like some tutorial stuff in here where he goes over how he designed it. Girl Next Door, like that, he kind of went a little like I don't know what the word is, like rebellious, like grandpa. Martial arts master. So this one's one that's awesome to me. Like when somebody says martial arts master, like some of you may like immediately thought of Bruce Lee. Like I don't know where this person came up with this, but I love that he has a cigarette for some reason. Like why is that? And and just that little addition, the cigarette, and then the like bushy eyebrows and mustache, somehow tell a little bit of a story, right? Like he's a martial arts master in a small town. He also owns the hardware store, and he became awesome at this because the people kept breaking into his store, and he wanted to be able to like defend. Whatever. Like you could just start making up a story because this isn't just a knee-jerk reaction to that prompt, right? So rabbit, I like that one. I actually like this style and proportion choice a lot. When we talked about the 3 main body masses, like look at this one. Like think of the proportion of the head mass to the rib cage mass to the pelvis mass, right? Like that rib cage is like a little bitty tiny dot, right? And like the head is enormous. Like I love that they just push that. So let's go back a little bit. Stormtrooper. Here's some more tutorials. This is actually some pretty good stuff about like going from sketch to ink and that. So this was for the Viking female character. Like this one was the zombie character. This is for those of you who are who do a lot of illustration in Photoshop. I'm sure a lot of these are actually done in Photoshop. And one of the things I liked about this is how he blocks out the colors here. Like that's not the colors that everything's going to eventually be. But once you get those flat colors, then you can use selection masks and stuff like that to sort of change that however you want to painterly. So Otto Schmidt is a famous illustrator. Tom Bancroft is actually an illustrator who lives in Tennessee. He was he worked at Disney. He was one of the animators for Mushu on Mulan. And actually, we had him come here and speak. He's the guy who wrote some of the other books that are on this list. But he came here and spoke like 2 or 3 years ago. So, and he has a lot of stuff online and a whole book about character design. So there you go. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let me see how big this folder is. Ugh. We're doing it anyway. So this class files folder here, I have a whole bunch of different stuff, including that 21 draw. I also have a bunch of stuff about the building block method, which is like kind of how I'm doing it is with those 3 spheres. You can get to see a lot of other people who have used this for figure drawing. I think this book was written in like the early 1900s that this is coming from. So like this isn't a new idea. And again, this is some more from that. So I'll let you sort of browse through those. And I'm just going to go ahead and drop that in our class folder. Okay. So, make sure I didn't move it. I copied it. Yep. Okay. So we have this this scene now. We have this audio clip, and I have a character design. Right? So what I wanted to spend most of my in-class time today doing is animating this shot. Right? So again, it's 24 frames long. I'm going to, because of the way I'm doing it, I'm going to animate it on ones, but that's going to be an interesting element as well. So a lot of what I'm doing today is I'm doing stuff in Toon Boom and showing you how it works. What I'm going to do is lessons on the tools, not something that you may directly apply to your own animation. It may, like you may use it in a different way later, right? So it's going to be hard for you to follow along exactly unless you're animating the same exact character I'm animating. So what I would recommend is, for the most part, just kind of watching today. You know, you can kind of doodle along a little bit, but I have a feeling that this is going to be like the most amount of information about the software that I'm going to be dumping on you today. And some of it is really confusing. So that's why, like, yeah, I understand it's you're wanting to get the concepts done and all of that. But yeah, I would encourage you just to kind of watch during large sections of today. So what I want to talk about first is the other way to use Toon Boom. So what we've been doing so far, I'm going to actually turn off my sound. So what we've been doing what I just did. Okay, I'm cool. So I'm going to add a new drawing layer, and I'm just going to call this face. Okay. Just for fun. Okay, this is just a little test that I'm going to do just for illustration purposes. So I'm going to very quickly just draw a. Okay. I'm just going to draw a quick character head, okay, or a character face here. Okay, so as we've already seen, I can now go to the next frame if I wanted to, be a completely empty frame, and I can draw another one. I can select elements of this drawing, right? So I can click on this, and if I'm like, oh, you know what? I need the head to be smaller in proportion. can scale that down, right? Like I can do all sorts of different stuff with this. I can skew it, right? But what I'm doing right now is I'm editing drawing elements, okay? And so when how to break this up? So this drawing element is just a vector shape, right? That vector shape exists within a exposure of my drawing layer. Okay, I know that's confusing, but we can tell this because right now I'm in camera mode, and if I go into drawing mode, there he is, right? This drawing exists outside of that layer, right? It's just this thing that's like, it's like a resource that's in our file now, right? Which means I can do all sorts of stuff to my animation, and I can come back in here and change this drawing later, right? So let's say you do your animation of an object moving around the scene or whatever, and then later you want that object to be red instead of blue. You can just go into your drawing and change it to red. So kind of getting off topic there a little bit. The interesting thing to know is when I'm moving this, I'm moving the individual line. I'm moving like the stroke, like the vector shape, right? And one of the ways we can animate is just by erasing all of those vector shapes in the next frame and doing a completely different vector shape. But another way that we can animate is just to move that vector shape over time, right? So the way that we do that is not to actually move the vector shape, it's to move the drawing layer, right? This thing that I have selected right here, it has the ability to be moved, rotated, scaled, constrained to other objects. I can it is like, this is where Toon Boom gets so ultra powerful that it's confusing, like it's scary, right? So I'm going to start with a kind of simple head here to explain it, right? Right now, again, when I'm grabbing stuff with these selection tools, I'm grabbing the drawing elements. Just like we did earlier, I can use the fill bucket. I can fill this with, let's do that again, with this color. If I want to change that color to something different, something completely different, right? I can do that at any point if I change my mind on that color. I'm like, oh wait, I don't want them to be purple anymore. I want them to be blue, right? All of this is in there. But again, what I'm changing are the drawing elements, right? All of those drawing elements right now, because I wasn't paying attention where I was putting my time slider, exist on frame 10 of my face layer, okay? If I go to frame 11, it's not there. Still exists in my scene, right? It just doesn't exist on frame 11. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this all the way back to frame 1. Go ahead and go out here to the end of mine, frame 90. I'm going to hit F5 to extend that all the way out to the end, right? And so that's that same drawing. Now it just is being exposed on my layer for all 90 frames, right? And again, if at any point I wanted to make changes to this, I could. Like, let's say, while I'm on frame 1, I'm like, you know what? I don't like the shape of this eye. I'm going to go in here and make it just a little bit bigger, right? I can, but what I just did was changed it on this entire drawing, right? And since that drawing is being exposed this entire time, it never changes, right? Now, that's because, again, I'm choosing it with these selection tools. I'm going to try choosing it with a different tool now. I'm going to go to this thing down here at the bottom. See this little box with these dots on it? So I'm going to select that. It's the transform tool, okay? And you'll see when I do, I sort of get this bounding box around the whole thing, right? You'll also see this little point right here, right above his lip. That's sort of the pivot point, okay? So I can move that pivot point down to here, and I can rotate him around. I can do whatever I want to. And you'll see that as long as I have this selected, when I select it, it grabs the entire drawing. Actually, let me undo that, because apparently, there we go. Remove this pivot point. It keeps putting it back. Oh yeah. So this will move the entire drawing based off of wherever this pivot point currently is. Now, if I want to change where that pivot point is, I can click this. And I believe I can, you can see this little crosshatch here. I can move it there. I believe now whenever I go into here, it will always have that pivot point there. And again, I can rotate this, I can move it around, I can scale it. But I want you to notice what happened on my timeline there. On that frame, I now have a little red dot, okay? And this is going to get a little confusing because Toon Boom calls stuff things that animators use for different reasons. That is what Toon Boom is calling a keyframe. Okay? And really all that is a marker in time on this object's properties, right? It translates, it rotates, it scales, right? So let me go back here a few till that dot disappears, right? And kind of show you why that's important, okay? Because if I were to use this transform tool, move this head over to here, right? I get that little dot. Actually, I think if I hit F6, yeah, F6, it sets a keyframe on it automatically, even if I haven't changed it. So sometimes you want to do that. So F6 will set that keyframe. Moving it with this transform tool will set a keyframe on the channels you change, but when you hit F6, it sets it on everything. So on frame 1, now it's saying, anytime we're on frame 1, I want this head to be over here on this side of the screen. Right? So let's go to frame 20 and change that. Let's move it to the other side of the screen. Right? And you'll see what I get is another keyframe that's connected by a line. Now, I haven't done any more drawings, but what Toon Boom is going to do now is it's going to animate that object's location for me. Okay? Now, I know you're probably kind of frustrated at me right now for making you draw 90 circles the other day, but this is limited animation. This is only going to solve some of our problems, because you know that that's always the same head. It's just in a different place, right? There's still a lot we can do with that, though, right? So if I hit play, moves to the other side. And you see it moves very linearly, right? Like it's moving the same distance every time. We're not getting any ease in, ease out, any of that stuff. We'll worry about that a little bit later. We can always go in here in between, right? So I want it to start there. I want it to end here, but halfway through, I want it to go a little higher, and I want it to sort of drag behind a little bit, right? And so I've set another keyframe, and when I hit play, right, I can get that, okay? Now again, this is still on that same drawing. This is not me doing anything different to the drawing. And so the cool part about that is that if I go back to frame 1, why is this not frame 1? I don't know. If I go all the way back to frame 1, right, this drawing here, and I say, you know what? I don't like what I did with his nose. I'm going to change some stuff. So I'm actually going to go to my drawing, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm really going to rearrange this thing. I'm going to delete that nose, fill bucket that back in. I'll draw a different nose entirely. Something like this for a nose. I want his mouth to be open. I forgot to give him an ear. Goodness, Greg. What were you thinking? Paint bucket, blue, ear. And I want him to have at least a couple of hairs, right? He's maybe a very subtle. I guess I should probably make these hairs that same color blue, huh? There we go. Completely different character. Well, what I did is I changed that drawing, right? I didn't change any of the keyframes on that drawing. So now all that animation I had on there is still happening on that drawing, right? This can get even more complicated because I'm not animating that image. I'm animating the layer, this face layer, that image is on, right? So how we were redrawing that ball every frame, I could redraw multiple versions of this face, and I can have those exposures happen while that layer is moving. So imagine what that means is it's going to be a little hard to kind of see it in here, and don't really worry about following along. There's a better way of doing this. But let's say right here, I wanted him to close his mouth. I could add a duplicate drawing of this, and then go in here. Release his mouth. And do like that. And so now you see that there's a new drawing and a new keyframe there. And so it's going to be open and then it's going to close and go on over, right? So, you know, when I was talking about like we can rig a character to be able to, like the Archer illustrations I was showing you, this is the earliest version of that. Understand that like a full character rig is like this times like 50. Right? Like and that's what we're going to be working on next week. And I know it feels like we're accelerating kind of quick on that level, but once you see like some of this, it's actually really, really cool. So like there's other things we can do with this layer. We can set keyframes on it, but we can also parent it underneath other objects, right? So let's say I wanted my character to be running and I wanted the head to be bobbing, right? Well, I could just parent the head underneath the body and just animate the head bouncing up and down, but everywhere the body goes, the head will go with it, right? So like there's a whole bunch of like extra things that we can do to this. Anything you can think of, the answer is yes, we can do that. So what we're going to do today, though, is I'm going to sort of pause on like the rigging stuff, and I'm going to go into creating this illustration because there's a little bit more on the drawing side that I haven't really shown you yet as well. And we're going to go ahead and create that sort of base animation for my for the nun character of her just sort of like bobbing her head. I'm kind of thinking she's going to do the hand thing. If that's still not feeling like enough motion, I may actually kind of have her do like a little bit of a hip shift or a toe tap, okay? And the hip shift we can do just by warping the same drawing over and over again. So my goal in this class is to throw as many tools at you as I can and get you a little bit of experience using them. Don't sweat it if you don't understand all of them right off the bat, okay? Like it's going to be you sitting down, trying this, and trying to figure out what it is that I did or how I did it in order to get yours to do the same thing. And that's why hopefully in the next few classes we're going to have a lot more in-class work time. So I'm going to go ahead and import in. I'm going to go ahead and delete my face because I don't really need that. Right-click, delete. Go all the way back to the beginning here. Actually, all I really need is the first 24 frames for right now. That's 26, 24. There we go. And that way I can sort of see my timeline a little better. I'm working on a different section so I can save it. But what I wanted to show you too, if you make some changes to stuff and you want to save that as a new file without copying over your old file, there is a way to do that. If we go to File, Save As, don't do that, okay? What that does is create an entirely new folder structure underneath your folder structure. And if you keep doing that, eventually you'll just nest over and over again. It's the one right below it, Save As New Version. And so I can just call this Dance None. I'm going to do Dance None 01. Okay. And so what that actually did, I'll show you in my folder where I'm working. Is where I used to just have this dance X stage. Now I have Dance None 01. But all of these folders and the elements in them are all still the same. So I'm going to go ahead and import in my concept art. So let me find that. It is, let's work. No, will not work. So none picks. The one I'm going to use is the one without color, this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to just put this in its own folder. Just make a new folder called Resources. You can call it whatever you want to, but paste that in there just so I have it. Now, I haven't tried it this way, but I'm going to try it anyway. If I just drag this to here, oh, it doesn't do anything. Drag that to there, it doesn't do anything. Okay, that's cool. So I'm going to go File, Import Images, say Browse, and then I'm going to have to point it to that layer or that folder that I just created. PNG, open. So, do I want to keep an original bitmap? I can convert it to a Toon Boom vector drawing. I may actually try that. I'm going to try this first. I'm going to keep as the original bitmap. And if I do that, it's just going to bring it in as a new layer. See 4 here, right? And it is on that layer. How do I move this around? I bet it's with this, yeah. So I can move this around, put it wherever I want to. I have to be careful because it's setting keyframes when I do that. If you don't want it to set keyframes, you just uncheck this little walking guy here, and then I can move it around wherever I want to, and it doesn't set keyframes. You'll just have to remember to turn that back on later. So just to test this out, I'm curious. If this works, this is actually going to save us a lot of time. File, import images, same image. I'm going to convert to a Toon Boom vector drawing. I don't think I want either of those options. I'd like full color, please. Huh, that's actually not bad. I'm going to do cancel. Sorry, I haven't tried this before. That's actually pretty interesting. That's exactly how I wanted it to work. Okay, don't worry about it. We can vectorize this ourselves. Oh no, I don't want the last one. I do think that there's an auto trace mode on this that will allow you to trace the image. But I actually haven't tested that very much, so but I do think that there's a way you can do that. You can import your drawing from some other program and trace it, so or automatically trace it. So I'm going to create a new drawing. Again, I like to do the vector drawing. I want to show you something though here. You see where it says line art and color art? That's because there's one other type of layer in here. Each of our drawings have 2 layers. Now there's actually a way we can turn it on to have more than 2 layers, but one layer is for when you want to draw your lines and one is when you want to draw your color. Just remember that. I'm going to start with the character's torso, or the entire body, right? So I'm just going to call this body, add. Okay. And so now I have this body layer. Let me go ahead and close that. And we can use our original illustration as a reference point. Ooh, you know what? I think I just figured out a way to do this a little easier too. I'm actually going to do this as dress. Okay. So instead of doing the entire body, I'm just going to do the dress as a separate piece, and then the sort of shirt torso part as a separate piece, and then the head as a separate piece, and then maybe the arms too. So in our drawing tool, grab this. Let's see. Just looking at some stuff really quick on my drawing tools before I decide if I want to bring this up. Yeah. So I think for me, I'm going to start drawing with my pencil tool. Now remember, again, the difference between the pencil tool and the brush tool. The pencil, oh, it's because it's below it. So I got to put the dress on the layer above it, right? So remember the difference between the pencil tool and the brush tool. If I draw with the pencil, it's a single stroke with a thickness. I can adjust that thickness later if I wanted to. I can still make it thinner or thicker, right? Versus the brush tool is going to draw a blob that has, different, it's drawing a blobby shape, right? So I'm going to do the pencil tool just because it's a little easier to work with for line art. Okay. So for my character's dress, I need to do some tests here, see how big of a stroke I need. Okay, so that's not thick enough. I want to make a little bit of a thicker line. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust my maximum size here. Maybe a little too thick. It's getting close. Let's go ahead and set it maybe to like 11. No. Oh. 11. There we go. Yeah, that feels about right. Now the other thing I want you to notice is the smoothing on the brush, right? Now if I turn that all the way down to 0 and I draw a really jagged line, I'm going to get exactly that jagged line, right? If I turn this smoothing up, I think default it was set to 20. If I draw that jagged line, it's going to kind of smooth it out a little bit, right? If I turn that up way high and I draw this jagged line, it's going to smooth it a lot, okay? You need to practice with that to see what it is you like, right? I don't want to over smooth it, but I have a kind of shaky drawing hand, so I'm going to keep it at about 30. Let's see what that does. And then with this tool, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I'm going to use it to kind of draw my general shape here. I'm going to try to see if I can get all of this in one stroke. All right, so I'm just going to do something like that. That was bad. Try it again. Better. There we go. I'm also going to, something you can test out to see if you like it or not. Down here at the bottom, there's this little hammer right here. And this is in our tool property. There's this little hammer with the line. And what that means is that if I start drawing close to the end of this line, it's going to try to connect those two together, right? If I draw a little further away, it won't. But if I draw closer, it'll try to connect it all in one line. I kind of go back and forth on whether I leave that on or off. I'll go ahead and try that. So that'll let me get through the top half of that. And then I can back out a little bit more. And I kind of like this setting because I have a tendency, my sort of default is that little like scratchy buildup of lines. And that's not always ideal for illustration. So this will kind of help you if you have a tendency to work that way. The real answer is to try to get out of that tendency. And so now this line is a weird like wavy line for me, so I'm just going to try to get it in one stroke if I can. And that worked, but I want to exaggerate it just a touch. There we go. So, with all of that, it's looking pretty good. I'm going to take my cutter tool, and then I'm going to go in here and trim off these little edges. Now I know that gives me an ugly point right there. It's all right, I'll fix that here in a minute. There we go. And to connect all of that together, I'm just going to select all of my lines, and I think it is this button right here, merge pencil lines. So watch what happens to this little corner when I do that, this little band-aid here. It's going to connect it. Now, we have some options on how that connection happens. If we don't want it to be rounded, that's what this is here. We can change that to sharper, or we could change it to a bevel. Let's see what it looked like sharper. It's kind of interesting. It's not bad. I don't know. I think I just like it rounded. Now, once we've created this, that doesn't mean we have to be done, right? Like if we want to continue editing this, that's what this other selection tool is for, right? If I want to go in here and grab this, readjust it, adjust my line a little bit, right? We can get as accurate as we want on this. I also think there's a, let's see, is it a smooth editor? Yeah, the smooth editor will allow you to, is it this one? Sort of paint over areas to smooth them out. That doesn't seem right. Anyway, so we can still do that. We can go in here, select pieces, sort of readjust them. And I know this is under the dress, so it's not really, or under the other part, so it's not really going to be an issue. This kind of has a little bit of a wobble to it, so I can go in here and just kind of adjust that with my tangent. And get a more accurate line for what we want, right? Now, there is a couple of things, before I move on, all that makes sense? Anybody have any questions about any of that? I feel like I need to reiterate, if at any point you have questions, please stop me and ask them. Like I would rather you like me be able to feel out like the direction the class is going. So I'm not one of those teachers that's like, don't interrupt me. Like interrupt me anytime you need to. This can be an open conversation. So if I say something that doesn't make sense, like make me reiterate it. That's the only way I know. Yes. So a lot of this is if you're drawing using the pencil or the pen, each of them have different tool properties. Actually, all of these tools have different tool properties. So it's under the tool properties of the pencil, and if you scroll down, it's weird because the pencils have a scroll line here too with all these different presets, but it's down here below it. Okay. So, any other questions?
Would you say that pencils use, do you use vectors and brushes when we use vectors?
Brushes and pencils and brushes can both be in vector. If you create an animation, when you create a new animation drawing layer, if you choose bitmap, I think it will only let you use the brush. Like it doesn't have a pencil, because a pencil, all the pencil is really doing is drawing a vector line. And so if you choose a bitmap layer, I'll show you. Right now I'm like this, my dress layer right here is a vector layer. If I went to add a new drawing layer and I chose bitmap, on that layer, the pencil isn't available. So I only have the brush options, and it's a different set of brushes that are available for the vector layers. Does that make sense?
Okay,
Yeah. So it's weird because it can be both a raster drawing tool or a vector drawing tool. For me, just this ability to edit the line after I've drawn it is one of the reasons I like using the vector. But it gives you fewer like texturing options. Like if you're wanting to do like a soft shading, you can't really do that very easily in vector. Well, you can, but not in this program. So the interesting thing is you can have both. You can have a vector layer and a raster layer on the same, or you can have vector and raster on the same layer. They just have to be on different, it's weird, like it's called layers 2, which means like somebody just needs to go in there and just like into the company and just like rename everything. Everything is named in a way that it's a little confusing. But we have our layers down here, right? Like we're right now on the dress layer. Our reference is on this number 4 layer. We got this audio clip that's on its own layer. But on our dress layer, if you look over here in our drawing area or our camera area, you'll see that we have this L and this C. Okay? So that's a different kind of layer. These aren't animatable. These are just 2 different levels that you can put art assets or drawing elements, right? So I will show you what I'm talking about. If I am on this L, if we go to the drawing, maybe we'll see a little better. Let's go ahead and do it in camera. I'm going to go ahead and hide the dress just so it's not as confusing. So if I'm on this L layer, that's where I've been putting all of my line work, right? If I were to go to this blue channel, take my brush, paint across it, that blue goes over top of my line, right? If I go to my color layer, if I click this color layer and I draw on there, it goes behind my line, okay? So it's basically for each of these drawings, so if I go back to my lineup, for each of these drawings, you have sort of like a foreground and a background, okay? Strangely, there's also 2 other layers you can unlock that are sort of like a template layer for reference stuff as well. So you can have up to 4 layers on one drawing. But again, they are called drawing layers as well, or they're called drawing layers, versus this like thing at the bottom here, which is also called layers. So again, please somebody write angry letters to Toon Boom and say, figure out what you're going to call some stuff. But this can be really cool. The reason this is kind of neat is because I can now do fills on this and paint on top of those fills without having to mess up my line art, right? So for those of you who do your line art first, and then you want to color that in and shade that, right? These 2 layers are very necessary. So to show you what I'm talking about, like if I were just staying on this line layer, right? And I went in here with my blue and I fill bucketed that blue, And let me see, I'm gonna fill bucket it this blue. And then I wanted to use this blue to do like a shadow, like near the edge here, right? And I go in here and draw the shadow. You're seeing I'm drawing over my line art, right? So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my fill on my color layer. Unfortunately, if I just go to the color layer and I use the paint bucket, nothing happens. And that's because there's actually nothing on the color layer to fill. Yeah, I know. I get there's just a lot to this. That's why I record the classes so you can watch this again. So one of the things we could do is I could duplicate this line art down to the color layer. So I'll show you this eyeball that's right above it. If you uncheck that eyeball, let's see, is it on? Now, like, it's still on. Now when I go to the, well, it only works in apparently the drawing mode over here. When I go to the color layer, line layer, yeah, there we go, you can kind of see. My line layer has nothing, so when the eye is unchecked, I guess, the line layer has nothing, or the line layer has the address, the color layer has nothing, right? So the trick to this, if you're wanting to be able to color on the color layer, is you grab those lines, and it's this button right here. This is going to create color art from line art, okay? So when I do that, it doesn't actually look like anything changed, but if I go to my color layer, you'll see that there's a shape there now. It doesn't actually have any image, it's just a shape, but I can now use my fill bucket to fill that shape. Okay, so when I go back to my camera now, if I'm on my color layer and I wanted to add some shadows to this, I can now paint in my shadows and they're going to show up behind my line. See? Okay. I know that was a little confusing. As I go through this, I'll do it several more times so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. One of the other things that I think is kind of neat is that I can go to my color layer, select that shape, right? And in my brush mode, there's another mode here called repaint brush, right? And so that repaint brush will only paint on things that already have color on them. Okay? So that means if I wanted to go down through here, do a shadow all the way down that, it's just going to paint on the things that already have color on them. Okay? So it's a couple of extra steps to figure some of this stuff out. I understand that. But just kind of bear with me. It will get a little easier. So, okay, obviously I've been doing all of this in blue and black, and that's not the right color. But I used these options here, so that means I can make some changes pretty easily. I don't actually want my black lines to be black. I want them to be a little lighter, because then any of her forms that go in front of each other that have an outline will kind of pop themselves out, like they'll have a little bit of a silhouette around them. So my black line, I'm just going to rename this line work, okay? And I'm going to change that to a light gray. So if I go multiple wheel mode here, and take that down a little bit, somewhere in that range. There we go. And this one that's called red, that actually looks blue, I'm going to move it up. And I'm going to name that cloth color. And I'm going to make it just a little bit darker of a gray. Okay? So not completely black. Down the saturation here. Maybe something like that. Right? So now you're kind of getting the idea of what that looks like. if I go back and look at my original reference, I think I have my line work color just a little lighter than that. There we go. And then there's one last color I kind of need. If you look in here, you'll see I made some slightly darker blacks for some shadows and for like the background elements. I may or may not actually do the shadow on the elements on top of it. I may just use it for the background elements, but we'll test it out and see. So we'll use for that, we'll use this darker blue here, and we'll call this Cough Shadow. And I will make that, actually I think I have a eyedropper here. I can click that eyedropper and actually sample if I wanted to. There we go. And so that means if I wanted to on the dress, I could go in here and again, on my color layer, I could paint some shadows on it, right? Right now I don't want to, but I just wanted to have that so I can use it here in a bit. Okay. How many of you are feeling a little overwhelmed right now? Anybody? All right. That's okay. We may not, let's just see how far we get. I'm going to keep illustrating these. I'm going to keep talking. If you want to start doing some, like, if you're not ready to start on your character and you want to start trying some of this along with me, because a lot of the stuff I'm going to do for these next few pieces, I'm just going to be creating new elements for my character, right? And again, like I said, I'm going to break her up into different pieces because of how I want them to move. I think what I want right now is to break up her upper body, her arms, maybe, I don't know, I may actually make her arms and her hands just part of her upper body, her head and her feet, right? So those are kind of the pieces I'm breaking up into their own layers, right? So if you want to start doing some just testing around, again, you don't have to do this in your character. You can do this just to explore how the drawing tools work. I'm going to go ahead and make all the rest of the drawing tools or all the rest of the drawing layers for my character. I think in probably about 20, 30 minutes, I'll be able to animate her, and then we can do some kind of quick animation with it, right? Okay. So I need a new layer. I'm going to call this upper body. That's fine. And I'll go ahead and turn off her dress, turn on her upper body. I didn't think about that. Is that gonna be a problem? No, I can do that. Okay. So I'm going to do 2 layers, I think. Upper body front, and then this little part that goes behind her here, I'll do that as upper body back. Line work. Tools here. Yep, that's good. So I know I need and then just crisscross this. Man. Go. I'm going to again use my cutter tool to trim off these little pieces. The cutter tool is under the selection tool here. And then after I've done that, select all my pieces and use this Band-Aid right here to stitch them all together. What happened? Why did it get so much smaller? Let's try that again. I may have to edit it after I'm stitching it together. Large pencil lines. Oh, I know what happened. Trim that. Now I can put them together. There we go. And annoyingly, kind of messed up the way it looked. I'll do a little bit of editing. Um, okay. So, get this drawn. I'm going to go to my color layer, my drawing mode, my line layer, and select my lines. And then I can click this button right here, puts that down to my color layer, and then I can fill my color layer with that color. I'll go back up to my line layer. There we go. So we have both of them now. Let's see. Camera. So I do need on the dress to go ahead and put those lines, I guess. So kind of eyeball them right now, some of my lines. Body, I don't think there really was anything. So I'm also going to do a little bit of a behind the habit to give it some, or not habit, the dress to like, or shirt to give it some depth. I'm just going to do that with a new layer though. There's actually better ways of doing this, but a little bit more confusing. So. Drawing on color. There it is. And I'm going to fill it with the shadow color. Camera. Now that needs to be behind the dress. So you've probably already seen this, but where you have these layers will tell us something about the depth. So if I drag this upper body back to behind the dress, now it should all look right. It's kind of hard to see how it looks on here though, because we see all of the layers at once, right? If we uncheck this light right here, then we'll actually just get to see the scene as it is. So these are the elements I have so far. Okay. All right, that's working well. So let's go ahead and uncheck these. I'll turn my dress back on. And I'm going to do another layer for the arms. Let's do I'm going to do her right arm and then her left arm. So for her right arm, this. Use my cutter tool to trim off the elements I don't need. And then I can grab all of this, band-aid it all together. No, that's not what I wanted. I guess I actually don't have to band-aid all of it together. We'll do those three. All right, cool. Drawing, push those to the back layer, color layer, fill that. There we go. Color layer. There we go. I guess I need to. You know what? I'm going to try something different. I don't think I'm actually going to put that arm on its own layer. I think I'm going to go ahead and do all of the arms and hands just to simplify a little bit. I'm going to do all of that on the upper body front. I'm going to do, if I grab these two, I think I can do right click, merge selected layers. And now all of that is on one layer. It's a little confusing there. Ah, no, never mind. Sorry, thinking out loud. I guess it makes sense to have it on 2 layers. Just a little extra work. So, interesting trick. You can duplicate these layers. So I'm going to right click my right arm, duplicate selected layer. I'm going to go ahead and rename that left arm. And I'm going to put that below the upper body and then move the line work over to here. And then I'll just go ahead and delete this fill. And do it again. This time I'll fill it with the darker color. Yeah, that's good. And, yeah, it's looking pretty good. I just realized that on her upper body, I didn't add the habit thing, the little shirt thing. You may try that on a different layer and then merge that down. This. White. We'll just go ahead and leave that as white. Drawing. All of that. Color. That white. And then just a little bit dark shadow. Oh. Yeah. So let's see how that looks if I merge it onto upper body. Actually, So I'm merging that layer down. Oh, wait. Merge selected layers. Ah, that's good. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do the feet down here. Okay. Again, into the drawing layer. Down. Color layer, fill. Looks like I just drew those with the wrong line color. There. Actually, hands, and I'm going to do one for the head. we go. So I have to pick a hand or a skin tone. I'm going to go ahead and use the eyedropper to do that from my original drawing. There. If you click and hold this eyedropper, you can sample from your scene and get. And I'll call this skin. And on my hands drawing, down, color. So I'm going to make one more decision that's kind of seems like a weird one maybe. I'm going to put her neck as part of her upper body. So I'm going to kind of have her neck come up out of here and go back behind her head, so we have that as a separate piece. So let's do it a little different. Go. I can select that line. Here. On my computer. There we go. And then head. Cutter tool. Trim. Together. I'm going to do all of this on one layer. Sometimes that little connector tool is annoying. There we go. So we go to the drawing tool, select everything, merge that down, color. So this is something that sometimes you can't fill that because you need, but you still want that gap. So you can go in here on that stroke you generate down to the next level. You can grab this and actually stretch it out, and then it makes it easier to fill that. And when you go back to the line layer, now you just have that gap between here. So, like that. So just for a second, I'm going to go ahead and draw her facial features on a new layer. Probably should have drawn them before. Okay. Merge. There we go. And then the last thing is I'm going to put this little extra habit in the background here. Again for that. Pencil line, swirls out. Draw those on the wrong layer. Control X, Control V. Yeah. Push that down a little layer. Go bucket with. So, I have all my drawing elements now. I'm going to go ahead and put these together and save it. And then if you want to, we can take a couple minute break. I know a lot of you have kind of been tinkering while I've been working. Hopefully some of you have been sort of watching and trying it out yourself. How's the drawing tools? Are they feeling, I know they're a little awkward at first. Are they starting to feel a little more comfortable? I'm using these multiple layers because it makes it easier for me. Doesn't mean you have to, but it is something that is there for you. And so hopefully me doing it over and over again, although probably not the most exciting thing to watch, hopefully you got that in your head a little bit. So again, how I drag these layers will change how they're visible. And there's some other elements involved with that. So if you've used Photoshop, you recognize that a layer, when it's above another layer, is visible on top of it. There's some other things that we can consider here, including depth. We're not going to worry about depth so much just yet. What I'm going to do is just worry about the height level of this, like which one's above which one. And so right now I want this rear head to be below the upper body. I'm going to drag that all the way down to there, and there she is. I feel like we need to give her a name. I don't necessarily know why yet. I'll be thinking about it. Sister Mary Clarence. What's that from? Oh, yeah. That's actually playing at Barter right now. I haven't watched it, but it's kind of exciting. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and save this. File save. Again, you can save as a new file if you want to. And then I think we need to take a couple minute break because what I'm getting ready to get into are two new areas of the program that are very technical. It's not scripting by any means, but it is different than drawing, right? And so you're going to need to like kind of shift gears. Trust me, you're going to want to stretch and possibly like get a drink of water for this. But strangely, we like in production, if I were just cranking this out, I'm about 10 minutes from being done with this. Like the full animation complete. But there's a couple of things we have to wire together in a way to make it work better they'll be a little confusing to wrap your head around at first, right? So let's go ahead. It's 3:10 right now. Let's go ahead and take let's say a 15-minute break. So be back here about 3:25, and I'll go ahead and show you how to wrap this up and animate it with our head bobbing. So while you're taking a break, I'm going to tinker with a few things before I do this in front of you and make it even more confusing than necessary. So but yeah, 3:25, we'll get started back.
Question for curiosity.
Yep.
With you splitting up these layers, are you going to actually be animating different layers individually, like just changing their position, or?
Kinda, yeah.
Kinda?
So we're going to be changing the position. We're going to be rotating them. There's a whole bunch of different elements we can do. But
Okay.
yeah, we're going to be kind of changing their position. Where this gets a little complicated is you got all this overlapping stuff happening.
Okay.
But it should be pretty. It shouldn't be that bad. I just want to test out a few things to make sure. But yeah, mainly we'll just be like changing the overall position and rotation.
Okay.
So, for example, like I want her to sort of what's the wrong piece? The upper body. Just want her to dance around like we can dance around like this, right? And we can set keyframes on that. But we can also connect things to it, and that's the part that's going to get a little confusing. So, like, I
Have
can
something bound to
yeah,
it.
I can have her head and her head and her arms sort of connected to that torso, so they go with it instead of staying where they are.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we're going to do in next class period. So,
Alright.
make sense?
No, it does. Cool. Reason being, I might have to dip out of here a little early. My work scheduled me a little bit earlier than I expected them to.
That's cool.
I just wanted to make sure that is the goal, is that we're divided.
Yeah, if nothing else, like just hop in here on the video. I'll have it up there by the end of class.
Okay.
And just hop on there and watch like the last 15, 20 minutes of it or whatever to see what it goes.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Do you think with what I have now that I could probably follow along with this next part? Color or anything? Or I just made it?
I think so. What I would say is just to save it as a new file
Yeah.
and try. And worst case scenarios, you have to go back to that old file. So that'll be
Does it break the arms, torso, legs? Nothing, she's just like snap.
Oh, okay. So here's a neat thing. You know how I showed like his mouth changing as it was going across? You could draw every frame of that snap, like 4 or 5 of them, and just have that play on that one hand. And that's all you really need.
I was thinking maybe like also.
Yeah. So there's some really simple stuff you can do to it. I shouldn't let it do. All right. The diamonds are tomorrow. Is it the one dancing?
Yes.
Single?
You guys want to use my
it'll probably be there faster than walking. What would the cab here?
Because I have this holiday and I have to go to work
If,
right
if,
after this.
if you need to run your truck out, I will postpone as long as I can. Your car.
I'll go run.
So, bring that downstairs to the office. Go talk to her, and she should be able to So when you, if you do that, I'm just going to show you on another layer here. So let's say I let's say I this shape, right? And then I go to my drawing section here. Zoom out, see that. If I uncheck this I, it's a little clearer. When I go to the C layer, there's nothing there, right? But if I click this button, it puts an outline of it down here. However, if I were to go now and change this, that outline that's on here is still the old one.
Okay.
So the way you have to do it is go back to this line art and you may have to go in here and select this and delete it. Go to the line. Maybe I should really select this line and do it again. And then now I can.
Okay.
Does it make sense? So let's fill it with another color so we can see the effects. So now they're both on there. Unfortunately, like if I were to edit that line again, like edit that again, it's not filled in there, right? And then the color, it's still that shape. But I can delete that shape. Outline shape. Apparently, it just deletes the whole thing. But then I can hit that button again and refill it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's kind of just like defilling that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. And again, like if you're not going to be doing any complicated fills, like the biggest reason to do this is so you can then paint on this color layer and not go and the line will still be on top.
Okay.
That's really the biggest reason to do that. It's not that you have to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to double check, you said the tempo that we're working with is 120 beats per minute?
Yes, actually, the file I put up there, if you pull it down, it should already have it on there. So I think it's technically 124,
Okay.
which means you get 4 extra beats a minute. I'm guessing that if your animation loops like several times, you'll be off by a frame.
Yeah.
So you're not really going to notice it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it'll still work out pretty good to it.
All right. Thank you.
Anytime.
I'm not sure what I did, but like my layers were like kind of transparent and I kind of did them like all so
Oh, yeah. You actually have that now. So it's this. Check that. And so what that does is lets you like when you just have one layer selected, it'll let you see it a little bit more clearly than the others. It shows you whatever you really see it clearly. But if you want to be able to see all of them, just check it. Yeah, that's just in the layer orders. It's very So I'm going to show you some interesting stuff next week where you can pretty much just like hook it all together and just grab one part and move it. Like all we're going to do some basic versions of that set. I have a feeling people are already kind of a little overwhelmed today, so I'm going to skip that. Yeah,
It works too easily.
Yeah. So there's actually some kind of deformation tools too, where we can like work that whole section. They do it. No, I put a folder on the network that has, yeah, dance. And so like, you can say that one. Like, you know, you can turn it on. It's how we're supposed to organize it. We're welcome to work in that. But really the easier way is probably just use the dance folder that's up there. Where you're talking about. Just if you have assets already, just paste those in. There's nothing wrong with using that scene if you wanted to. I think the interesting thing is this video just has like a 20-minute like stuff like wall and we're just staring at them. I've been on a diet since 1989. So I think it's starting to work. Okay. I think for the most part, I think everybody's back. So, all right, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started back. Let me make sure this thing's still recording. It appears to be. We're at 2 hours and 16 minutes so far, so I should live stream this stuff, see if we can get people from all over the world watching. So again, one of the reasons we do this this way, or a couple of the benefits of how I've been doing this, is I can very quickly recolor things. So let's say my cloth shadow, like right now that feels a little too dark. I can go in here, I can still like lighten that up and sort of adjust it for the entire scene. All sorts of different stuff. I'm not super crazy about my skin tone right now. I can maybe add just a little bit more peach to that. Whoa, let's undo a couple of those. The first one, it's the skin tone I don't like.
I think it's fine the way it is because she looks like she gets the perfect amount of no sun.
The perfect. Okay, I'll agree. Now the cool thing about this is that I can duplicate this whole thing when I'm done, and just do a different fill color on the skin, and I could have like a whole army of head bobbing nuns. Like, or maybe army isn't the right word. They're peace loving. So I think that there's a lot of neat stuff we can do with this. But I wanted to show you kind of really quickly all of that stuff I just did, how it is broken up now. I have my feet on their own layer. I will say later, I want her really getting into this, so I will probably, in some of the later pieces, I will think about where her legs are. For this one, I don't need legs because I don't think they're actually ever going to show. But when I start planning out the animation, I'm going to animate her legs underneath the dress, and then I'm going to animate the dress responding to where her legs are, whether we ever see them or not. And that's just, for me, that makes sense because otherwise it's not going to feel physically accurate that she's actually making contact with the ground. So again, her feet are on one level, or one layer. I get this really weird thing happening here with this back of her shirt, and that's because we're not really using depth here. I want it to look like her dress is going underneath her, like whatever the upper garment is that goes over her torso. And to do that, I wanted to fake some depth there. So I have two upper body pieces. This one and then a little further up, the front one, right? I have her left arm, which is that one in the back. I have the back of her head piece here, right? I have the upper body front, which is the torso. It also includes the neck and that little white collar thing. And I have the hands as a separate piece because I don't ever really plan to separate them. I kind of constantly want them like together. And then I have her right arm as a piece, right? And then I have her head, or at least the foreground part of her head, entirely as one piece, okay? All of these are different layers, right? And I just need this to animate for 24 frames, right? So I'm just going to, like, if I go to frame 2, there's nothing there. So I'm just going to go all the way out to the end of this, frame 24, highlight all of these layers. No. Let's just go ahead and highlight all these keyframes and hit F5. No, cancel. It doesn't work. Maybe I have to do it out here. I bet it is. F5. There we go. And so now all of these drawings are visible all the way through the animation. Now, in a minute here, I'm going to start animating parts of her, rotating or moving a little bit. So one of the things I need to consider is from what pivot point are they going to move, right? Again, I showed you one way in which we can change that, which is this pivot point tool, the drawing pivot here. And I showed you one way we can move these pieces, which is this object right here. So if I grab my character's head, right, and click here, you'll see there's the pivot point, and I can rotate her head from that point. It sets a keyframe. That's not really what I wanted to do, right? I showed that I could move the pivot from here, but I wanted to introduce you to some of these tools up here, mainly these 3 or 4. These are sort of our animation version of the same thing, okay? So I'm going to go uncheck animate for right now, just because I'm going to be moving, editing some stuff, and I don't want to mess it up. Control Z is your friend during all of this. I'm kind of going to change some stuff, and then come back to it later. I don't want to set a keyframe and accidentally animate it. So if I rotate something, I'll hit Control Z to get it back in this neutral pose. But these 2 tools here will also translate, rotate, and scale. And I also have a skew, right? And so these are ways I can warp or move this object. And you see when I go to translate, I get these little arrows where I can move this object up and down. If animate is on, when I do that, it will set a keyframe. Now it's just setting a keyframe on the translates, but that's okay. If you look though, right at the center of this is a little blue dot. And the first thing I'm sure most people who are used to working in a 2D or 3D program will do is grab it by that blue dot to move the whole thing around in either axis. But all that's actually going to do is move your pivot point, okay? Which is actually cool. Like if I grab this now, I can move my pivot point up to here, get it set to where I want her head to actually rotate. And now if I wanted to move her head, that's the new pivot point, right? She could dance a little bit like this if she wanted to. Or if I wanted to rotate her head, I could do it a little bit like this, right? So very simple stuff. What I'm going to do before I animate anything though, is I'm going to go through here and I'm going to make sure all of the pivot points for these things are where I want them to be, okay? So let's go to her right arm. I want our pivot point to be up here in her right arm. So I can rotate it from there. Looks good. Her hands, I'll go ahead and put that pivot point sort of at this wrist point. So if they wanted to bob a little bit, they can. Her upper body. Now this is an interesting question. Like, in theory, for most rigs, you would put that around the hip or like belt line, right? Because that's really kind of where your center of gravity is. That's this piece that I move around in order to keep my weight over the correct leg, right? But that really just depends on how you want her to dance, right? I don't want this to be like a really elaborate dance, but maybe for your character, you're really wanting this like big hip movement. And so something you can think about is maybe that pivot point is up here, right? So when they dance, they're really like throwing their hips around. For hers is going to be very moderate, so I'm going to move this down like right about here, and that way I can get just a little bit of body movement out of that. Head rear, that's this back little piece of the head. I'm going to temporarily kind of put it here in its own pivot point so we can get a little extra bounce out of it if we want. Right? Left arm, again, I'm going to try to figure out where that shoulder is. Actually, probably the best way to do that would be to hide these other layers so I can see it. I'm going to put it at the actual shoulder. Right? Kind of the same with the right arm, I would say. Yeah. There we go. Yep. The dress. Now, again, this is like, where do you want her to be rotating from, right? And so, like, if she's doing a little dance where she's kind of rocking from side to side, maybe I would put this down here, right? So she can get just a little bit of rotating from side to side like this, right? And actually, I think that's what I'm going to do on mine. Her upper body back, I'm not going to worry about this too much. I'll explain why later, but that will work. And then her feet, I just want those to be down here, close to her feet. If you're wanting to have your character sort of tap one of their feet, you probably should put these on 2 different layers, because right now it's going to look a little weird if you tried to do that, right? So you'd have 1 foot on each layer. And if I go back through here, all of this should now be in the correct location, and I can animate from those points. However, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got 9 layers of stuff, and all of that I kind of want to keep roughly together, right? I don't want to have to constantly be tracking everything and realigning. Like if I rotate her head, or if I rotate her body, right? Or rotate this upper body front. So not only does her arms come disconnected, her head comes disconnected. Like that just looks bad, right? And so if I needed to connect all that stuff or move all of those parts to connect them back to the torso, that would be very like time-consuming and laborious. When in real life, your arms and head just usually stay connected to your torso, right? So I'm going to show you a trick. It's not a trick. This is just a tool, right? You know how if you've done anything in 3D animation, this is going to be very familiar to you. It's parenting, right? But if you haven't, or you're still familiar with this concept because you use it all the time, right? Like if you have a folder full of, let's say you had to take 2 different English classes. You had to take one in the fall and one in the spring, right? And you have on your home computer a folder that says Fall 2017, right? And inside of that Fall 2017, you may have your English class folder. And inside of that, you have all of your English papers. And you also have a folder in there called Math, whatever. And you have like something you had to do for a math test, right? And then in spring 2018, you had the other English class you took and a couple of essays that you had to write for that. You understand how those files nest inside of those folders, right? If you put your English papers inside of a folder that says spring 2018, and then you move that spring 2018 folder, all of those files go with it, right? That is a hierarchy structure, or hierarchical. So we use the word hierarchy in anything that has a chain of command. Some people like to use a parent-child relationship, that the parent is the controlling object and the child is the object that follows along. If you think about that, like a parent walking through a parking lot, holding their kid's hand, in theory, wherever the parent goes, the kid should go with them, right? They're actually a little more squirmy than that, but that is how this would work. And so just like that, the way you would drag your English paper into a new folder, you would just drag that file on top of that folder, right? That's what we're going to do here. But when we do that, it's going to really screw up how this looks, okay? So let me show you what I'm talking about. For example, right now I want to move my character's head, but you'll notice that when I rotate my character's head, this little back piece back here doesn't go with it. And I want it to. And that's this, where's that? Head rear, right? So what I can do is I can just click on this head rear layer and drag it on top of my head layer. And now whenever I move the head, so that head rear layer is underneath it, and it goes with it. Now I can also animate the head rear layer, right, separately if I wanted to. Don't have to, but I can, right? But what that messed up is it pulled that head rear layer above the torso on our layer stack here, and now it's in front of it, okay? For right now, don't worry about that, okay? I will show you how to fix that here in just a few minutes, but for right now, don't sweat it. I want the same thing with the arms, right? I want to be able to animate my right arm, and I want the hands and the left arm to go with it, right? So I can grab these hands, drag them on top of the right arm. So now when I rotate my right arm, the hands go with it. If I rotate the hands, they can kind of be boggling on top of that, right? And if I drop the left arm on top of that, same thing happens. Right? Now I want this left arm to be below the hands, so I'm just going to drag it a little lower. Let's see if I can do this differently. Drag the hands on top. There we go. So we kind of get a different orientation there. So I'm just kind of building this hierarchy of control, right? I'm going to go ahead and put, just as another example, my upper body front. If I rotate my upper body front, this little rear piece back here doesn't go with it. So I can just do this upper body back, drag that on top, and now when I rotate upper body front, it will go with it. In fact, I can go ahead and drag my arms on top of upper body front as well, and my head. And now when I rotate upper body front, all of that stuff goes with it, right? And if I grab the head, I can still animate the head on top of that. But again, it's all turning into a mess up here, right? Like this does not look good anymore. But again, I'll show you how to fix that here in a minute. The final thing is I want my dress to be the very main control, that if I rotated from the dress, the entire character would kind of lean from side to side as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy dress, or move upper body front, drag that on top of dress, and then I'll drag feet on top of dress as well. And so now if I rotate from here, my entire character is going to go from side to side. Actually, I'm not going to do feet. It doesn't actually seem to work so well. I want the feet to kind of stay in the same place. Maybe what I would do is drag dress on top of feet. That way, if I wanted to rotate from the feet, I can. And then if I wanted to rotate from the dress, I can, right? Okay. And now my character looks terrible. Right? That does not look anything like I want it to look, because I just rearranged what is on top, right? Now, if you're just doing something simple, we can use that. What is higher or lower is going to show first. But where we're starting to get a little more complex here, we're just going to do something a little different. There are two different concepts behind this stack. One is what is visible, and one is what is controlling other objects, right? So it's a folder structure, but it was also kind of loosely a visibility structure. I think when they made this, they realized we were going to break that, right? Because you can't have both at the same time. So there's another tool that is inside of here that makes this, actually there's 2 or 3 ways to fix this. One of the things that is possible is this has actually got depth to it. I can push stuff further back. Like right now we have side to side, up and down. We also have forward and back. There's a little bit of 3D in this. That's kind of the sloppy way of doing it. What I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to change the order in which it displays these objects to you from forward to back. To do that, I'm going to open up a new tool that's like it's a whole new ballpark, right? This is the tool that you will be using to do most of your rigging. It's called the node editor. Now, if you've worked in Maya before or any of the 3D programs, you're familiar with nodes, so this is going to be somewhat familiar to you. If you haven't, it's okay. Just recognize that what I'm getting ready to show you is a sort of a theoretical representation of how this scene is organized, right? Nodes are very abstract, right? So I will break this off in another one. I'll just sort of pull it over here so you can see it. So if you look, if I just pull this up, if you look over here in our color palettes, right, I get this color node, but then I also have this node view, right? And if I click on node view, it's a mess. It's just a bunch of like boxes with lines connected to it. First things first, we want to be able to see this in a more sensible manner. So I'm just going to drag and select everything. And I usually use, I think it's this one is the one I like to use. This order node view down, which is like 3 white boxes here. And just hit OK for the default. I don't know why it left my right node all the way over there. Go ahead and pull it over here though so we can look at it. Okay, so this is what this scene looks like. I know it's a little confusing. Don't feel like you have to understand it in the next 5 minutes. But let me just kind of walk you through what is actually happening. Each of these little boxes above this composite node, this really long one in the middle. So everything above this node right here, right? So there's that one. All of those little boxes that are higher up on the screen than that, those are those drawings we just did. Like the drawing of the head, the drawing of the feet, the drawing of the dress, right? Each of those is a different drawing, a different one of these layers, right? So everywhere where you see a green line connecting one to the other, that green line is saying that the object higher is controlling the object lower, right? So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I zoom in here a little closer, I've got my head and head rear, right? So that's the head layer, right? And there's this green line going to head rear, which makes sense. If I select head and I rotate that, we already know that it's going to control head rear, right? So this green line means it's controlling it, okay? Any blue lines, they involve the object's display. How are we seeing that object, right? And so right now, don't worry too much about the node view. I've introduced you to it. It's like meeting an intimidating person at the party. Shake its hand politely and like you just hang out until you get comfortable with them. And eventually you'll be friends with this person. They're loud. The node view is intimidating. This will make more sense by the end of next week. Right now, the only thing we need to realize is that all of these blue lines are piping into this composite node. And this composite node is piping into display, right? So basically what this is saying is all of these drawings are merging together into this one node, and then that one node is displaying on our screen, right? And so you notice that they all pipe into the top of this, and if I change the order in which they pipe into the top of this, I will change what is visible forward and back, right? Like what is the top most visible object. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I'm not, the further to screen left, so like this object right here, that is the top most visible object. This is the bottom most visible object. And you can see what that is 4. Oop, accidentally unconnected it. So that's my reference, right? I don't even have to be able to see that if I don't want to. In fact, it will still stay in the scene if I just unplug it, right? Watch what happens in my layers over here. It just disappears. It's still in my Maya, or it's still in my my file. It just disappeared for now, right? The same for all of my reference up here. If I don't want to see that anymore, I can unplug those as well. They'll still be in there, but what I want though is I want my head to be the topmost visible object, right? And you'll see that it goes to right there. So I'm just going to drag it all the way over to here. And when I do that, it pops to the front, right? Now you'll notice head rear, it's still further back there, so it's showing up further behind the rest of the objects. Okay. My character's right arm, I want that to be a little further forward as well, so I'll just drag it forward until we can see it. There we go. And then let's see, my feet, I don't really care about seeing those. Those can be all the way down at the end. Right? And really the dress can be pretty far back there as well. The only thing that needs to be behind the dress is that back part of the upper body. So this upper body rear, upper body back right here, it needs to be one more back, right? And so by doing all of that, now my character is completely visible in the correct way, right? But I can also still animate them. Right? If I grab the dress, I can rotate this. If I grab the head, I can rotate that, right? And so she's ready to go, right? I'm going to save this as a new scene. So I'm going to File, Save New Version, and I'm just going to save this as O2. And the reason is because now I have a clean version of this file. She's ready to animate. I'm going to go ahead and animate her doing her little head bob to this music. Okay? How many of you did I just lose? How many of you? That was very confusing stuff, right? That's, again, why I'm recording it. You can kind of go back and watch it. Yes. So you should just be able to drag it. You'll kind of see that when you drag it, you'll see like when you're on top of something, there's no lines, but when you go a little higher, there's like a little blue line that shows up. You see how that's happening? You should be able to do that all the way out to here. Worst case scenario, if that doesn't work, what you can do is go into the node editor and just break this little green line connection. So that will also work. You're welcome. Okay. I'm going to go back to color, hide that node view because it's intimidating. Questions on this? So it could be that you just don't know what questions to ask because that was a lot of information. And I recognize I'm throwing a lot of information at you in this first week. It's kind of like, again, it's kind of like I want to introduce you to it so you can be ready to tinker with it over the next few weeks, right? Like you don't have to understand all of it. You just have to know it's there so you can solve problems with it later, right? Later, you're going to be doing another animation. You're going to be like, I need this thing to be behind it, but I still want it to be controlled by this thing that's in the front. How do I do that again? I remember he did that. And that's kind of how the rest of your career will look, right? Like I remember 5 years ago, somebody showed me how to use a certain emitter in Maya. I can't remember how to use that off the top of my head. I remember it existed. I remember parts of how that worked. I have to go fix that again, right? So animation is kind of like problem solving. I'm introducing you to a giant toolbox full of tools. Once you start a project, you have to figure out which is the best tool for this. And there's not always one answer. Sometimes there's multiple answers. You can tear apart a wall with a crowbar or a hammer, right? Like there's plenty of ways that maybe you're going to use them both. I don't know. You should probably use them both. Okay, so So we have 24 frames here. I'll go ahead and turn my music back on. This may wake you up a little bit here, but so that's all I need to animate, right? To those beats, right? Again, if I wanted to, I can turn on that number sequence, right? So I can see where to put them. So I'm gonna uncheck these things. It's really beat, right? So I know I need one on 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I know that I need this to end, the very last frame after that, right there, needs to be the same as frame 1, right? So let's go ahead and, I'm gonna go ahead and extend mine out to 25 just so I have that. Go ahead and hide my reference here. And highlight all that, go ahead and hit F5 again, extend that on out. So what I'm going to do, highlight everything on this first frame, right? And I'm going to hit F6. The reason I'm doing that is because that's going to set a keyframe on everything, okay? To give you an idea about what this is, don't sweat it just yet. But if I go here to like feet, you see this little plus sign at the end? If I drop that down, you'll see I have position, rotation, scale, and skew. If I hit F6, it will set a keyframe on all of those values, okay? Which is what I want, right? Now, I'm going to go all the way out to the end of my animation, and I'm going to set a keyframe there too. Now, I'm kind of just starting at my default pose. You may need to start at a slightly different pose. You may want to start with your character's head up or down or something like that. We'll kind of figure that out as you go. For me, I think this will work though. I'm going to go out here again and hit F6. And so now I just have 25 keyframes of that pose, right? But I can see that on frame, so this is on frame 7, that's when that number 2 kicks in, right? So that's where I want one of my key poses. I want one on frame, looks like 13 and frame 19, right? So right now, let's just go halfway. Let's do that one that shows up on frame 13, right? And I'm just going to change this up a little bit, right? Maybe I'll go to her dress, and I'll just rotate her forward a little bit. I'll use her upper body. I'll rotate her. Oh wait, got to undo some stuff because apparently I forgot to turn on animate. This little like walking person here. F5. Sorry, F6. So again, on frame. Okay. So, dress. Rotate her just a little bit. Upper body. I'm going to rotate her back the other way. Head. I'm going to rotate it back the other way. And then head rear, I may have it like dragging a bit. And then my arms, I'm going to rotate it back. Now, even though I didn't animate those other pieces, just to be safe, I'm going to highlight everything and hit F6. So just by doing that, I get a little bit of a different result in this animation now. So okay, so I know that's annoying to listen to. But trust me on this rhythm thing, like everything I just did, I just need to get those other 2 beats in there now, right? So I got, why didn't this pop up? So I need to start on 2, right? So again, I'll go ahead and set a keyframe on everything here, F6, just so I got something on it. Maybe her dress. If I kind of scrub, I can see what it did before. So like it's going to there. So maybe on the dress, I will actually rotate it back. I'll kind of do the whole opposite. Too much. Settle down. Okay, I can delete that keyframe. Just kind of keep her. I'm gonna try to keep her a little more in the neutral area here. Right? So maybe that one's just a little too much on the dress. The body. Control F6. So up, down, and another up right there for the head. Maybe I'm doing this a little bit wrong. Maybe I should do it one layer at a time, kind of. Yeah, let's try seeing what happens if I take some of this other stuff out of here. I think it'll make it a little more make sense. Actually, I may be doing more than is absolutely necessary on this. I may be overkilling a little bit. So I think I need a little bit more in the hands. So let's see, we got, yeah, this will step back and forth through the keyframes. What's the shortcut key for that? Oh, it's the comma and bracket. So, okay, that makes sense. Oh, that's nice, yeah. So let's look at the hands here. I want that to be down. Hands down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. So okay. So maybe not the best animation in the world, but we're gonna keep sort of tinkering with it just a little bit. Because right now our head's bobbing, but I kind of, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I actually want our head kind of sort of like pushing forward just a little bit. So I'm gonna do this, delete my keyframe, and I'll go ahead and set the same keyframe there. And instead of rotating her head forward, maybe I'll just sort of like push her head forward. Right? Now here's the cool thing. If I like that keyframe, I can right click on that and say, let's see. I can just do copy. I don't want to copy the cell. I think it will actually work to just do copy. So Control C, and then I can go out here to this frame and hit Control V. And so now I got the same two keyframes on there. And so let's see. So that's working a little better. Now, unfortunately, I feel like she needs that didn't quite work. There, that head needs to be a little further forward again. Let's see what that looks like. I don't like how far forward the body's coming right there. So let's just change that a little bit. There we go. That's feeling a little better. Now, again, if I wanted to add just a little bit more to this, I can do this layer by layer. I could go to the head and maybe add just a little bit of rotation on each of these. Where it overshoots just a touch. That. There we go. That's what I was going for. So, one of the things that's a little annoying to me is that our hands are hitting on the same frames, right? I kind of want that to overlap. I want her head to hit and then her hands to hit like a frame or two after, right? So we can try that. We can see if we can make those motions happen a little later. So that's just on these hand keys. I can go here and grab all the hand keys. Let's just try to see what happens when I change the ones in the middle first. Just drag those a few frames forward. There we go. And then the same with her arm. Maybe I'll drag it like a frame forward so they're not hitting on the same frames, right? Maybe with her dress layer, and drag that one or two back, and then the upper body, maybe drag it one back. There we go. That's the bebop and none I was looking for. So, the only problem with this is that it feels jittery, doesn't it? Like, doesn't it have kind of like it feels a little poppy? Right? Not like in a positive way. Like it's like snapping or hitching, right? So I'm going to introduce you to one more thing that's going to be a little bit, a lot to take in, right? If you've animated in 3D before, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I get where you're coming from. But recognize that what we're doing is we're changing values over time, right? We have our translate X is our, like the location our object is from side to side on the screen, right? And what we're doing is we're saying at one point you're at 0.5 and then a little later you're at 0.2, right? And all we're doing when we're setting these keyframes is we're changing that value. Well, the way Toon Boom figures out how that transition happens is just to generate a curve between those, just generate a line between those, right? So we can actually look at that curve. I'm not going to overwhelm you with this yet, but later this is how we can really finely craft every motion that we make. So in Maya, we would call it a graph editor. In Toon Boom, they call it the function editor because I don't know why. Because whoever was in charge of naming hated their job. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and stop this animation. I'm going to go to, right now the function editor is not visible. I usually like having it down here. So if I click this little plus sign over here in the corner, you'll see that function right there. And it'll bring up a new little window called function. Now I'm going to go back to my timeline, and I'm going to grab the head layer. I'll go back to function, and you'll see that what I'm getting is a graph, right? I'm actually getting several graphs. And if I uncheck stuff in it, like uncheck position Z, if I uncheck position Y, those aren't really changing. But position X is, okay, and that's the side-to-side motion, right? That's where her head's kind of doing that bump forward thing, right? And we can see that if we scrub through the timeline, we'll see that like here the head's back, here the head's forward. So up is forward and back is down on this graph, right? And so I kind of like that hard hit there, but I don't really like it in the back here as much, right? So what I'm really wanting is, I don't want this to be a perfectly straight line. I want it to be a little sharper, right? So if you zoom in here, you'll see there's a little yellow triangle at the end of this, and if I grab that and pull it out, I can change the way this curve interprets, okay? Now I don't have to do it that way. There's actually a couple of presets that I can do. I can grab all of these. All right, let's try that again. And I can go to corner, and I can change that to smooth. And then I take this little drop down, and I can choose one of these curve options. Right? So we get a little bit like that. But sometimes I still just like to kind of edit it a little bit. Right? And so if I do that, it's going to be really subtle, but you'll see like a little bit, it's a little bit softer, right? Still got that hard pump forward or punch forward, but the ease at the back is a little more smooth. Something that wasn't turned on though was angle Z. So if I uncheck position X and turn on angle Z, you'll see that, I usually click this button here, I think it is, normalize view. You can see that the rotation is very jagged, right? What I usually do is grab all of these middle keys, go ahead and set that to smooth, go ahead and set this to like one of these curved shapes, whatever. And for the most part, it will get you something. It's not going to be great, but it's something. These pieces in here in the middle, I still want to change those though. I'll grab that, alter it like this. So how you adjust this curve though is very much up to you. Like, as we adjust this, you'll see it's going to change the way that motion looks, right? For a lot of these, we can just sort of automatically smooth them. Some of them we have to put a little more work into it. So that's just for the head. If I go back to my timeline and I grab upper body front and go to the function for that, there's not really any motion, there's just angle. Okay? And so for this one, it'll be a little easier. I can just hit this smooth for it. I could probably even delete these two. Those maybe aren't even necessary. And I can grab these and maybe make that way more easing. There we go. So I do that. There we go. So it's feeling a little better. Some of the other things that are moving, the arms, the hands, the dress, Let's go back and look at those as well. So I'll do the hands first. Again, I kind of want the hands to have a little bit of that pop, but just on one end of it. So I think it's the down end, like when it goes down to there, I kind of like that pop. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these top pieces, set that to smooth and corner, close enough. And then I can break this. And this. That. So the cool thing about this though is like right now that hand motion is just a little bigger than I wanted, right? Actually the head motion is too. So this is also really handy because I can use this to edit my animation, right? If I don't want her hands like popping that far down or maybe not coming this far up, I can just go grab these and move them downward, right? I can grab that. I think I can do this one here as well. And now it just doesn't go as far. Right now it's going to be a little softer. There we go. The same with her head. Like, go back to my timeline, choose the head function. I really feel like my position X a little on the heavy side there. So maybe I would pull this down and then maybe make this not quite such a big motion with not quite such a big change in rotation on all these either. Right? So if we watch it now, it's a little lighter. I like that a little bit better. Last few things I'll change. I'll probably change her dress rotation. I think it's a little sharp on the rotation there. Yeah. Check those. Just grab this. And click. There we go. Something like that. And then the arms, which I think is her right arm, has the most amount of rotation there. So I'll probably just delete these two and put a little more skew in here. And then I can actually shrink this down. Let's just watch this now. It's not bad. So again, very, very subtle, hopefully. I want to show you now, like, the reason we're just doing this in this 24-second range. I can go, I'm going to go ahead and save this as a new version. Dance none, let's say Anim 1. Okay, so if I go back to my timeline, remember if I turn on the music, get the I want to see how it looks to the whole sound clip that I have in here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I have this out to, I think it's 190 frames worth of animation. I'll have to drag it out here until I see, but I think it's 190. About there, right? So what we can do now is if I copy all of this, Control C, I can go here and hit Control V, Control V. I'm just going to do this over and over again. I'm pasting it to the very last frame so it loops. So not the frame after, but the last one. And so you should be able to test yours out the same way. We can, oop. So, this is how I decided to do mine. You can play yours more low key. You can have yours do something completely different. They could have their hands behind their back and just be doing a little something like this. You could have them just tapping their foot and like looking around every now and then. Whatever you want to do. Just something low key that shows they can hear the music, but they're not really quite ready to just jump in yet, right? And we're going to build that up more and more in each of the dances. So the reason this works is because I'm not taking my character too far away from their original pose, right? Like they're just kind of she's just kind of moving her head a little bit, right? But if I wanted her to like throw her arms up in the air and like spin in a circle, there is no level of rotation or moving that I can do to these drawings to make that happen. What we're going to do in next class period is something that is more complicated, so we have to redraw the images, right? And as we sort of move along, we'll see some alternatives to mixing and matching those, right? So this is sort of our simple rigged version. This is kind of the limited animation version. The next class period will be frame by frame. So, all right, any last minute questions? I think we only have like 5 minutes left. I don't know how I keep doing this. How do I talk for 3.5 hours? 6 years of practice. So any questions, anything I can help on this? Anything that like is obvious? Yes?
How did you rearrange them in the orders where things are supposed to be forward, after you parented them?
After I parented them?
Yeah.
Okay. Under our node view, right here, it's just changing the order of which blue line goes into the composite first. So the blue lines are about the visibility. The green lines are about control. So if I just move this is the left arm. If I moved it way up here up front, you'll see now my left arm is in front, right? We can do some rigging in here as well where we plug these into each other. Where this really starts getting complicated is I have this node library. Here's a whole bunch of other nodes that we can use for this. And some of them are stuff like auto-generate shadows. Some of them allow us to put a normal map on this so you can have actual dynamic lighting. There's extra rigging nodes. There's some deformation nodes that allow us to warp and bend things as we animate them. So there's just a lot of stuff we can do in the node editor. We're going to dig into that a little deeper next week. And then week 3 is kind of a miscellaneous. That's miscellaneous week. Weeks 4 and 5 are the short film. So, any questions on any of this? How are you feeling about timeline? Are you able to keep up this pace? I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you every day and I'm not giving you a ton of work time. Hopefully that's going to change the further along we get. Like I'm probably not going to be lecturing at all on Friday. That's just going to be time for you to go nuts on this. Yes?
So does the character have to be rigged like yours, or can it be like hand-drawn frames?
You can hand draw them if you want to, but I would. A lot of the reason to use Toon Boom is for some of the rigging purposes, because otherwise, I mean, you could do hand drawn frame or hand. You can do frame by frame animation in Photoshop. Like I mean, like it's that's actually what Adventure Time is done in. So I would say play around with it because then you can like solve some problems that are helpful for that. That's what Animation 2 will be, is completely hand-drawn or completely frame by frame. Try to find something kind of simpler in this one that you can do, but yeah.
Because like the character design that I have, like his robe is like melded with his arm, so I really wouldn't know how to separate that except like leave an open area and like just have that filled color.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I was saying like kind of do like the first one, just kind of do like a simple one, like it was like a really subtle thing. So it could just be that you have an illustrate, or you just have one illustration that blinks every now and then and taps the foot. Right? Like that could be like the simplest like first level animation, and that way you don't have to worry about the robe as much. Do you have a question? How to connect the keyframes?
Yeah.
So they should automatically connect when you hit F6. Are they not? If they're not, there may be a reason for that, because those are called stop motion keyframes. So if yours do not have this line connected to them, I believe it's, let's see, this one right here, set motion keyframe. Let's see, there's a, yeah, try selecting it. So like if I selected all of this that I have right now and told it to use this as stop motion keyframes, it'll break them apart like that. But if I click this button right here, it will connect them all together. So it's the little like blue line. Did that fix it?
Yeah, I was hitting on
Huh?
I was just hitting on it, sorry.
Okay, cool. All right. So I can't tell. Are you enjoying this?
Yes.
Okay. I'm having a ball, but I don't want to be the only one. So, all right, cool. So I guess class is over. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll have that video up online, hopefully here in just a few minutes. Thanks. 3 hours and 15 minutes. It's my longest one yet.